Thanks to the rapid growth, improvement, and popularized use of new technology, more and more cold cases are being solved around the world every day. Whether it's new tools leading to the collection of previously overlooked evidence, DNA databases finding matches for crime scene samples, or the hard work of new cold case specialists, families of loved ones are finally being given the answers they've mourned over for decades. Number 5. 24-year-old Susan Schwarz was a high school friend of a man named Gregory Johnson's then wife in 1979. Johnson's wife, who has remained unnamed, had confessed her secrets to Susan about her abusive husband and a failing marriage in search of not only friendship, but help as well. Susan helped the woman into a shelter so she could buy time before moving out of state with the couple's child. Later on, a few weeks before the murder, the woman returned to Washington to visit Susan, catch up, and thank her for a helping hand and a kind heart. The reunion would sadly be tainted a short while later by blood spill and uncalled violence. Susan was later found deceased after being shot. Gregory Johnson was a prime suspect at the time, but thanks to a seemingly solid alibi and a lack of evidence, he was quickly released and no longer considered a viable lead. In 2010, a deck of cold case cards were issued amongst inmates. Each card held the face of a different victim, linked to a different cold case. If inmates were able to provide information concerning these cases, they would be rewarded. Each reward amount reflected the importance of the playing card. In this deck, Susan was the Queen of Hearts and thus promised a high reward. A tip was shared by an anonymous inmate about the cold case, although the details of that tip are still unknown. It pointed police in the direction of 58-year-old Gregory Johnson. Using this new information, as well as help of improved technology to test DNA, Gregory was arrested. In addition, police found that his ex-wife, the close friend of Susan, had been at the center of all of it. She confessed that she knew about the crime ever since it happened, but had been threatened into secrecy and burdened with the weight of guilt and regret in the decades that followed. Thanks to her witness statement and the revelation of many previously unknown case details, Gregory was found guilty. Susan's family was amazed at the news, but happy to see justice served. Susan's then 82-year-old father was especially touched by the news. His initial response was, "Isn't that something? I'm breathless." Gregory Johnson was later sentenced to 24 years in prison. Number 4. Joanna Harrison was only 26 years old when she was found deceased in a garage in Preston in 1975. Police first believed that she was taken by the Yorkshire Ripper, but advances in DNA testing later revealed that that wasn't the case. When her body was first discovered, investigators were able to collect DNA samples they believed to belong to her killer. Unfortunately, setbacks at the time prevented a match from ever being found. Joanne's case was later mentioned in a series of hoax letters from an anonymous writer claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper. DNA collected from these letters was not a match for the DNA at the scene, and although investigators were thrown off their track, she was never officially connected to the supposed Ripper, and her case remained a mystery. It seemed that justice would never be served as the case inevitably went cold and laid stagnant for the course of decades. In 2008, a man named Christopher Smith was arrested for a drunk driving incident. As required by law, Christopher was forced to provide a mouth swab of his DNA, and it was submitted to a massive online database. From this sample, a match was found which linked him to the crime of Joanne. Before charges could be filed, Christopher passed away in prison from a chronic illness just 6 days after being imprisoned. However, this was enough for the case to move forward, regardless of the status. Eventually, investigators also uncovered a letter which he wrote in his last hours alive, to which he allegedly confessed to the crime. In the letter, he stated, "To whoever it concerns, I would like to put the record straight. I can't go on with the guilt. I've lived with it for over 20 years. I'm truly sorry for all the pain I've caused to anyone. Please believe me when I say that. I love my grandkids and my daughter. I can't go back to prison anymore. I'm so sorry, please forgive me." Other details of the case, which may have been considered more significant, were not publicly released. According to a deputy on the case, that fact, coupled with the other evidence they had gathered over the recent months, had been sufficient enough to convince the Crown Prosecution Service that Smith would have been charged with her murder had he been alive today. Number 3. While any crime involving the loss of life can be considered a tragedy, some contain victims which make the case especially heinous, specifically when the children or elderly are involved. 83-year-old Minnie Martin and her husband, 81-year-old Ed Martin. were reported missing by concerned family members after relatives found that they were not home for their planned Christmas party. It was very unlike the couple to miss a family event, and even stranger for them to suddenly vanish from their home. In their old age, they rarely left the house even to run simple errands. A search was instantly organized as officers feared the worst for the kind old couple. The day after they were reported missing, witnesses claimed that they stumbled across the couple's car a few blocks away. When it was obtained by detectives, they found a significant amount of blood in the car. Additionally, the keys were left in the ignition. 4 days after this discovery, an even more upsetting one was made. A passerby found the elderly couple in a wooded area at the end of their street. It was revealed that the couple had been shot in their car and taken to the woods. A pair of brothers, Rick and John Riff, were the prime suspects in the case at the time. However, due to a lack of evidence and setbacks in DNA testing, the brothers were eventually released, and as a result, the case went cold. At the couple's funeral, their son promised to them that he would someday find their killer and justice would be served. That day finally came, although it was decades after the fact. The case was busted back open in 2012, and in a matter of days, the suspects were identified thanks to new DNA testing methods and a series of previously unknown details. While John Riff had passed away years earlier, his older brother Rick was arrested from his home in Alaska for the murders, and his justice was served almost immediately. The Lewis County Sheriff's Office stated, "We've developed evidence that Rick and his now deceased brother, John, kidnapped the Martins from their residence and drove them to the bank, forcing Ed to withdraw $8,500 in cash. Rick is now expected to face life in prison." Number 2. Helen Sullivan was described as a devoted, loving wife and mother. She was also praised for her success as an at-home businesswoman who made a decent living selling makeup and jewelry. She was tragically taken from her family when she was killed at her home on January 21, 1972. She was just beginning her work that day, after her youngest daughter had headed off to her own job and her husband was wrapping up a night shift, about to return home. He was the first to stumble across the horrible scene when he entered their home to find his wife had been assaulted and taken from the world. Police arrived at the scene and collected what they could as far as evidence. They told the family that a suspect had been committing a series of similar crimes in the area, but they believed Helen's killer had already been arrested and gunned down by police. The entire family was devastated by the loss and the vague news of justice. As the family later described, everyone was having a hard time coping with the news and adjusting to life without Helen. As mentioned, the police were at first convinced that the killer had already been taken care of, but the investigation that followed proved this was untrue. Sadly, it didn't provide any new answers, and the Sullivan family was left to wonder, mourn, and question and suffer for several decades, as it seemed Helen's killer had escaped. Helen's daughter explained that she held tightly onto her hope that her killer would one day be found. And in January of 2011, her daughter was shocked to receive a phone call from a detective assigned to the unit of cold cases, telling her that her mother's case had been reopened, and soon the DNA collected at the crime scene would be submitted to new and improved databases. While the news was bright, it was also obvious that the chances of solving the case, or even finding a match, were very slim. Miraculously though, about a year later, a match between the DNA at the crime scene and the California inmate roster was found. It determined that Emmanuel Miller was most likely Helen's killer, but unfortunately he had died in 1990 at the age of 54. Regardless of this fact, the Sullivan family was grateful to finally have answers and know that their loved one's killer was no longer a free man. Number 1. Traci Hammerburg was a vibrant, outgoing 18-year-old woman who was killed on December 15, 1984, after a fun night with friends. According to a timeline created after an investigation, Traci was babysitting at a home in Wisconsin when she left the home to walk to a nearby grocery store, where she met with a group of friends. The entourage traveled to a bar called Quade's Tavern in Port Washington, where they shared a few drinks and laughs before heading to a party. A bartender at Quade's told police that Traci had told him the party was at Grafton. While at the party, Traci and her friends allegedly drank and smoked before leaving to walk home. She was found about 4 miles away from her house and had traveled alongside a major road in Wisconsin. Along the way, she was abducted, assaulted, and taken from this world. Her body was found by a jogger the following Saturday morning. Police arrived and began collecting evidence as well as witness reports. DNA was found inside the woman's body, but a complete DNA profile was not established due to setbacks in technology. However, this information was sealed away with the rest of the case after it went cold for several decades. It wasn't reopened again until 2019. Police took the DNA that they had and made use of genealogical databases. The second cousin of a possible suspect was discovered, and police used the database information to begin building a family tree. Eventually, they were led straight to Philip Cross, a Wisconsin man who died from a drug overdose in 2012. After this news, investigators worked to create a DNA profile after an autopsy was performed at the time of the suspect's death. A complete match was found, directly connecting Philip to the crime. The killer would have been 21 at the time, and using a rough timeline of Traci's location, they believe she was offered a ride by her killer after he left his night shift at work nearby. Additional evidence, such as a violent background, was also found to tie Philip to the case and increase the likelihood of his guilt. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this narration, maybe consider checking out my personal channel at youtube.com/ty_knots. And if you like this video, be sure to click that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads.